Finally, we are now ready to talk about the abstract factory pattern. Even though the factory method pattern used an abstract class, don't confuse that with the abstract factory pattern. While the abstract factory pattern will look very similar to the simple factory and the factory method pattern, it certainly has its own purpose. I'll say this right away, not all applications will be in need of the abstract factory just because it's using the simple factory or the factory method. Just as with any pattern, you apply it where it's appropriate. Its purpose is that the abstract factory pattern provides a way to encapsulate a group of individual factories that have a common theme, without specifying their concrete classes. While this definition can be a little bit hard to digest, if we translate this into something that we'd be familiar with, we can look at a class diagram of how our application would change. We'd start off by introducing a common interface for our factory. The purpose of this interface is to define how to introduce a purchase provider factory. This will allow us to define creational method groups of objects that share a common theme. The return types of these methods are often interfaces or abstract classes, meaning that the implementations of the factory interface can choose exactly what concrete class to return. They're all in relation to an order that is being finalized on our shopping cart. We can then go ahead and create country-specific purchase provider factories. The individual methods for creating specific objects in these implementations of the factory interface can in their turn use pre-existing factories. For example, Create Shipping Provider could use our shipping provider factory. This has now given us the capability of introducing implementations for the purchase provider factory. For instance, we could introduce country-specific factories. If we choose to introduce a Swedish purchase provider factory, we will now know how to create a shipping provider, invoice, and a summary for the Swedish market. I can promise you that for the Australian version in this application, all the details in the concrete classes are going to be very different. Just as an example, invoices and the tax on them work very different in these countries. This pattern gives us flexibility. The client of the purchase provider factory knows only about the requested creation of a group of common objects. The common theme in this case is that they all depend on the order in our shopping cart. The program will decide which implementation of the factory interface that it will pass onto the shopping cart, depending on the details on the order itself. This means that we can extend the application with more implementations of our factory interface without having to change anything inside our shopping cart. The shopping cart will still know how to request instances of objects that the factory produces, without having to know about either the implementation of the factory or the concrete classes that is returned from the creational methods. As you can see here, this pattern is great for situations where you want to be able to create related objects. But in a lot of situations, you might just as well be better off with a factory method pattern. Again, it's up to you to decide which will fit the best in your solution.